They said I killed my mother just by existing. They said my father's heart couldn't survive the sight of me. They said death was my shadow, and anyone who stepped into it would never step out. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Her mother hemorrhaged on the delivery table, Florence's first cry coinciding with her mother's last breath. Her father made it 10 years. 10 years of avoiding her eyes, of flinching when she entered rooms, before his heart seized at her birthday party. His final words an accusation that branded itself into her soul. You did this. Her little brother Daniel drowned at 13, the same summer Florence taught him to swim in the community pool. Her fiancé David died when a drunk driver jumped the curb, 1 week before their wedding, while Florence waited at the church in her mother's repurposed dress. And Grandma Rose, the only person who'd ever looked at Florence without fear, passed in her sleep the very night Florence begged her, "Please don't leave me alone." By 21, the Kaler family had collected enough evidence for their trial. They gathered in the Baltimore Row house where Florence grew up, faces she'd known her entire life arranged in a jury of blood and disappointment. Uncle Richard stood at the head of the dining table like a prosecutor delivering a verdict. You're cursed, Florence. Death follows you the way sharks follow blood in the water. We can't risk you around our families anymore. Around our children. He slid $200 across the scarred wood, worn bills that felt like 30 pieces of silver in her trembling hands. Don't come back. Don't call. Don't exist to us anymore. 3 years later, those $200 were a distant memory, gone within a fortnight. Florence survived on Chicago's unforgiving streets through nothing but stubborn refusal to die, shelters when she could get in, soup kitchens when they were open, the kindness of strangers who didn't know they were supposed to fear her. She panhandled during daylight hours and hid after dark, always waiting for the next catastrophe, the next person to drop dead in her vicinity and confirm what her family had always known. But tonight tasted different on her tongue, metallic, electric, like the air before lightning strikes. Florence pulled her inadequate coat tighter and watched rain begin to silver the empty street, unaware that across the city, another cursed soul was hurtling toward her in a collision of fate and gunpowder. Unaware that sometimes, two curses meeting don't cancel each other out. Sometimes, they create something far more dangerous. Across town, in Chicago's industrial district, a sleek black Mercedes sat idling outside a warehouse, its engine purring like a caged predator. Inside, Marcello Dante gripped the steering wheel with tattooed hands, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He was 35 years old, built like violence in an expensive suit, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that had watched men die without blinking. For 6 months, Marcello's world had been falling apart piece by piece. Shipments intercepted by the feds. Key allies murdered in their homes. Business deals that should have been guaranteed collapsed at the last second. His most trusted lieutenants were starting to whisper that he'd lost his edge, that the Dante crime family was bleeding out slowly. Tonight was supposed to fix everything. A weapons deal worth $3 million with the Volkov family, enough money and firepower to rebuild his operation and send a message to his rivals that Marcello Dante was still the king of Chicago's underworld. But the text message on his phone told a different story. Deals off. Volkovs went with the Castellanos. They said you're bad luck, Dante. They said everything you touch turns to shit. Marcello threw his phone against the dashboard, watching it shatter into pieces. He didn't believe in luck. He believed in power, in fear, in making sure everyone knew what happened when you crossed the Dante family. But lately, it seemed like the universe itself had turned against him. His lieutenant, Tommy Ricci, was supposed to meet him here 15 minutes ago with information about who'd been sabotaging their operations. But Tommy was late, which meant something had gone wrong. Again. Marcello stepped out of the Mercedes and pulled his gun from its holster. The rain had started falling harder now, turning the street into a river of reflected neon lights. He moved toward the warehouse entrance, every instinct screaming that this night was about to get much worse. Florence had moved from the overpass to a 24-hour diner in the Loop, hoping to escape the rain. The waitress, a tired woman named Gloria, usually let Florence sit in the corner booth as long as she ordered coffee and didn't bother the other customers. Florence nursed her single cup for hours, making it last, watching the street through rain-streaked windows. That's when she saw him, a man stumbling out of the alley across the street, his white shirt soaked crimson with blood. He crashed against a dumpster and slid to the ground, one hand pressed desperately against his stomach. Florence didn't think. She threw $2 on the table and rushed outside into the rain. The man looked up at her with glazed eyes as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Help," he whispered. "Please." Florence ripped off her coat and pressed it against the wound in his stomach. Blood soaked through immediately, hot and sticky against her hands. "Stay with me," she commanded. "I'm calling 911. The screech of tires made her look up. A black Mercedes slammed to a stop at the curb, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, tall, dangerous, with tattoos creeping up his neck. Marcello Dante. At that exact moment, 3 figures emerged from the shadows. Masked. Armed. Moving with deadly purpose. Florence saw the guns raise. She saw them aim at the tattooed man. And something inside her, some instinct stronger than self-preservation, made her move. She shoved the wounded man behind the dumpster and threw herself at the stranger in the suit, tackling him to the wet pavement just as gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the air where his head had been seconds before, shattering the Mercedes's windows. The gunman fled as sirens wailed in the distance. Marcello pushed himself up from the ground, completely untouched, and stared at the shivering woman who'd just saved his life. Her coat was gone, her shirt soaked with rain and another man's blood, but her eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, held something that made Marcello's breath catch. "What's your name?" he demanded, his voice rough. "Florence." Marcello looked at Tommy, barely alive behind the dumpster, then back at this woman who'd appeared from nowhere and changed everything. For the first time in 6 months, one of his men might actually survive the night. "You just saved my life, Florence." He pulled off his coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "That makes you mine now." Florence was too cold, too exhausted, and too numb to protest when Marcello guided her into the Mercedes. She sat in the back seat, wrapped in his expensive coat that smelled like cologne and gunpowder, while he made phone calls in Italian that she didn't understand. The city lights blurred past the windows as they drove north, away from the Loop, away from the streets Florence knew. She should have been terrified. She'd just gotten into a car with a man who was clearly involved in something criminal. But after 3 years of sleeping on concrete and waiting for the next disaster, fear felt like an old friend. Marcello's penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan from the 47th floor of a luxury building. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling beneath them like a galaxy of lights. The furniture was modern and expensive, all sharp angles and leather. Everything screamed money and power. "Bathrooms through there," Marcello said, pointing to a hallway. "Take a hot shower. There are clothes in the guest room you can wear. When you're done, we talk." Florence expected interrogation. Maybe threats. Instead, when she emerged 20 minutes later, clean for the first time in days, wearing borrowed sweatpants and a t-shirt that swallowed her small frame, she found food waiting on the dining table. Real food. Pasta with marinara sauce. Garlic bread. A Caesar salad. Her stomach cramped painfully at the sight. "Eat," Marcello commanded, already seated with his own plate. "Then we discuss why you're still alive." Florence ate mechanically, each bite tasting like heaven and guilt. She'd learned not to trust kindness. It always came with a price. "Why did you save Tommy?" Marcello asked, watching her with those sharp eyes. "You didn't know him. You didn't know me." Florence swallowed. "He was bleeding. That's enough." "And me? Why tackle a stranger when there are guns involved?" "I don't know," Florence whispered. "Maybe I'm tired of watching people die." Marcello leaned back in his chair, studying her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve. "I don't believe in luck, Florence. I believe in leverage, in power, in making my own fortune. But I also don't believe in coincidences." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Tommy in a hospital bed, alive, stable, expected to make a full recovery. "For 6 months, everything I touch has turned to poison. Deals fall through. Men die. My empire crumbles. Then you show up, and for the first time since this nightmare started, one of my men survives." Florence's blood ran cold. "You think I'm, what? Lucky?" "I think you were in the right place at the right time. I think bullets missed me when you were there. I think Tommy lives because you acted." Marcello's eyes bore into hers. "So here's my offer. You stay close to me, and I make sure you never sleep on the street again. Food, shelter, safety, all yours. All you have to do is exist near me." Florence laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the expensive penthouse. "You want me around? I'm cursed. Everyone I've ever cared about has died. My mother, my father, my brother, my fiancée, my grandmother, all dead. My family threw me out because I'm bad luck in human form." Marcello didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "Good. I don't need you to care about me, Florence. I just need you to stand next to me while I rebuild my empire." Florence agreed to Marcello's arrangement, not because she believed in his superstition, but because the alternative was freezing to death on Chicago's streets. She was given her own bedroom with a lock on the inside, meals 3 times a day, and strict instructions: accompany Marcello to all his meetings, stay within sight at all times, and don't ask questions about his business. The first test came 3 days later. Marcello had scheduled a meeting with a weapons supplier at a restaurant in Little Italy. Florence sat quietly in the corner while men in expensive suits discussed shipments and payment schedules in coded language. Halfway through the meeting, the supplier's phone rang. His face went pale as he listened. When he hung up, He looked at Marcelo with something like awe. "The feds just raided my warehouse on the south side 30 minutes ago. If we'd stored your shipment there like planned, we'd both be in cuffs right now." He shook his head in disbelief. "You changed the location at the last minute. How did you know?" Marcelo hadn't known. He'd changed the location on a whim, a gut feeling he couldn't explain. His eyes found Florence across the room. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became undeniable. A rival family planned an ambush at Marcelo's nightclub, but a kitchen fire triggered the sprinkler system, flooding the club and forcing evacuation before the gunman could strike. A federal informant in Marcelo's organization got cold feet and confessed before causing real damage. A business deal that should have been a trap turned into a $2 million profit when the other party's betrayal was exposed at the last second. Marcelo's men started calling Florence La Fortuna, the fortune. Some crossed themselves when she passed, whispering prayers in Italian. Others left gifts outside her bedroom door: flowers, cash, even religious medals. They treated her like a saint, a living talisman that protected their boss. Florence hated it. She wasn't magic. She wasn't blessed. She was just a woman trying to survive, trapped in a gilded cage with a man who saw her as a good luck charm instead of a human being. But something strange was happening. The nightmares that had plagued Florence for years, visions of her family's deaths, her fiancé's broken body, her grandmother's final breath, started to fade. She slept through the night for the first time since childhood. The constant weight of grief that had pressed on her chest began to lift, just slightly. She found herself wondering, what if the curse wasn't hers? What if her family's rejection, their fear, their constant reminders that she was death incarnate, what if that was the real poison? What if being around someone who didn't fear her, who actually wanted her presence, was breaking the spell? Marcelo noticed the change too. Florence started speaking more, asking questions about his business, which he still refused to answer, even smiling occasionally at his dry humor. One evening, he found her standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunset paint Lake Michigan in shades of gold and crimson. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, joining her. "I'd forgotten," Florence admitted quietly. "For so long, I only saw the darkness. I forgot there could be light too." Marcelo studied her profile, the way the fading sunlight caught in her dark hair, the fragile strength in her posture. She wasn't just a lucky charm anymore. She was becoming something more complicated, something that made his chest tighten in ways that had nothing to do with superstition. Word of Marcelo Dante's miraculous turnaround spread through the criminal underworld like wildfire. The Dante family was back on top. Deals were closing, rivals were backing down, and the Fed seemed to miss them by inches every time. And everyone knew it was because of the woman he kept close, La Fortuna, the cursed girl who'd somehow become blessed. In Baltimore, Richard Kaler heard the rumors from a contact in Chicago's gambling scene. When he heard the name Florence Kaler, he nearly dropped his phone. Richard called an emergency family meeting. Florence's Aunt Margaret, her cousins Sarah and David, they all gathered in the same row house where they'd banished Florence 3 years earlier. "She's valuable," Richard explained, showing them news articles about Marcelo Dante's resurgence. "If she really does bring luck, then we made a mistake throwing her out. She's family. She should be helping us, not some gangster in Chicago." Margaret frowned. We told her she was cursed. We blamed her for everything. She's not going to just forgive us. She will, Richard said confidently, because deep down, she's still that scared little girl who lost everyone. She'll want to come home. She'll want family again. 3 days later, Richard, Margaret, and the cousins arrived at Marcello's building. They dressed nicely, rehearsed their apologies, and prepared to bring Florence back to Baltimore. Marcello's security escorted them to the penthouse, where Florence stood frozen in the living room, her face drained of color. She hadn't seen these people in 3 years, the people who'd called her cursed, who'd thrown her away like garbage. "Florence, sweetheart," Richard began, his arms open wide, his voice dripping with false warmth. "We were wrong. So terribly wrong. We should never have sent you away. We were grieving, scared, and we made a horrible mistake. Please, come home. Your family needs you." Florence's hands trembled. Part of her, the abandoned child who'd cried herself to sleep for months after the banishment, wanted to believe them. Wanted to think that maybe, finally, she could have family again. But Marcello stepped forward, positioning himself between Florence and her relatives like a wall of controlled violence. "She's not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold enough to frost the windows. Richard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "With all due respect, Mr. Dante, Florence is blood. She belongs with us, not with—" He gestured vaguely at the penthouse at Marcello's world. "This. She belongs wherever she chooses," Marcello countered. "And I don't think she's choosing you." Florence found her voice, small but steady. "Why now? After 3 years of silence, after telling me I was cursed and making me leave with nothing, why now do you suddenly care?" Margaret stepped forward, tears in her eyes that might have been genuine. "Because we miss you, honey. Because we were wrong about the curse. We see that now. Please, give us another chance." But Florence saw the way Richard kept glancing around the penthouse, calculating its worth. She saw the greed in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was a commodity instead of a person. "Get out," she whispered. "Florence. Get out." The words exploded from her with years of suppressed rage. "You threw me away when I had nothing. You blamed me for deaths I didn't cause, for tragedies I couldn't prevent. You made me believe I was poison. And now that you think I'm valuable, you want me back? Get the hell out of my sight." That night, after Marcello's security had escorted the Kaler family out of the building, Florence couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she found Richard waiting in the building's lobby. He'd bribed the night security guard to let him stay. "We need to talk," Richard said. "Alone." Against her better judgment, Florence agreed. They walked to a 24-hour coffee shop 2 blocks away, sitting in a booth far from other customers. "Why now?" Florence demanded again. "Tell me the truth, Uncle Richard. No more lies." Richard dropped the caring uncle act like a mask slipping off. His face hardened, revealing the calculating businessman underneath. "Because you're valuable now, Florence. You think Dante's the only one who could use a lucky charm? You come back to Baltimore, you help the Kaler family business, and we'll forget all that cursed nonsense." Florence felt ice spread through her veins. "You never really thought I was cursed." "Oh, we believed it for a while," Richard admitted with a shrug. Your mother died, your father had a heart attack, Daniel drowned, David got hit by that drunk driver. It was easier to blame you than to accept that sometimes, life is just brutal and random. We needed a scapegoat for our grief, and you were convenient. So you let me believe I was a monster, Florence said, her voice shaking with rage. You let me carry that guilt for 10 years. You threw me out, left me homeless, knowing it was all a lie. It wasn't exactly a lie, Richard said defensively. We half believed it. But now we know better. Now we see that maybe you were never cursed, maybe you just hadn't found your purpose yet. And your purpose is helping your family. Florence stood abruptly, coffee spilling across the table. You're not my family. You never were. Richard's expression turned ugly. You think you're safe with Marcello Dante? You think that's going to last? I've got contacts, Florence. FBI prosecutors, rivals who'd love to know where Dante keeps his weakness. You walk away from us now, and I'll burn his empire to the ground. Then where will you be? Back on the streets where we found you. Marcello didn't find me, Florence said quietly. I saved his life. And he's given me more respect in 2 weeks than you gave me in 20 years. Richard backed against a concrete pillar, his eyes darting between Marcello's armed men and Florence. You were nothing, he spat, his desperation turning to venom. A ghost we tolerated out of obligation. Your mother died screaming your name. Your father drank himself into a heart attack because he couldn't stand to look at you. And now you think you're something special because a gangster keeps you as his pet. Florence walked forward slowly, her footsteps echoing in the empty warehouse. Marcello moved to follow, but she held up a hand, stopping him. This confrontation was hers. I was never nothing, she said, her voice steady and strong. I was a child who lost her mother. I was a daughter whose father couldn't handle his grief. I was a sister who tried to save her brother. I was a woman who loved and lost. I survived your cruelty, your abandonment, your lies. The only curse in my life was you. Richard laughed bitterly. You think you're free now? You think Dante sees you as anything more than a lucky rabbit's foot? You're still just a tool, Florence. You'll always be. I don't need you to kill him, Florence said, turning to Marcello. I need you to let him go. The warehouse went silent. Marcello's jaw tightened, his finger still on the trigger. He tried to take you from me. And he failed, Florence said firmly. He'll always fail, because I'm not a possession. Not yours, not his. I'm choosing to be here, Marcello. But I'm choosing me first. It was the moment Marcello understood that his obsession with Florence as a lucky charm had transformed into something far more complex, and far more dangerous. Love. Not the possessive kind that demanded ownership, but the kind that required letting someone be free, even if they chose to stay. He lowered his weapon. Go, he told Richard. But if I ever see you near Florence again, if I even hear your name in the same sentence as hers, I won't be this generous. Richard scrambled toward the exit, then paused. She'll bring you nothing but pain, Dante. Just like she brought us. No, Marcello said quietly, his eyes on Florence. She brought me back to life. 2 weeks later, the FBI closed in on Marcello's organization. Not because of Richard, His credibility was destroyed, but because Marcello's renewed success had drawn too much attention. Federal prosecutors offered him a deal, 20 years minimum in exchange for his cooperation against bigger fish. They offered Florence immunity and witness protection if she testified. Her family, hearing about the case, called her for the first time since the warehouse. They begged her to take the deal, to save herself, to come home. Instead, Florence did something that shocked everyone. She used the leverage she'd gained, the connections, the secrets, the power she'd accumulated in Marcello's world, to broker her own deal with the FBI. She gave them everything: corrupt officials on Marcello's payroll, rival family operations, dirty cops and politicians. She burned bridges and made enemies. She sacrificed the safety she'd found in Marcello's world. And in exchange, Marcello got 3 years instead of 20. When Marcello walked out of federal court with his reduced sentence, he found Florence waiting on the courthouse steps. She looked different, stronger, clearer, like someone who'd finally figured out who she was. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," Florence replied. "But you gave me a choice when no one else did. When my family saw me as a curse and you saw me as a charm, you were both wrong. I'm neither. I'm just Florence. And I choose to fight for the people who see that." Marcello pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. 3 years. When I get out, I'll be here, Florence promised. Building something real. Something that's mine. And if you still want to be part of that, if you can see me as a partner instead of a lucky charm, then we'll figure it out together. 3 years later, the art gallery in Chicago's River North neighborhood glowed with soft light as collectors and critics mingled among Florence Kaler's paintings. The exhibition was titled Breaking Curses, abstract pieces that captured the journey from darkness to light, from victim to survivor. Florence stood among her work, wearing a simple black dress, her dark hair swept back, confidence radiating from every gesture. She'd built this life herself over the past 3 years. No family money. No mafia connections. Just talent, determination, and the refusal to let anyone define her worth. The gallery door opened, and Marcello Dante walked in. He looked different too, older, harder, but somehow more at peace. Prison had stripped away the expensive suits and the empire, leaving just the man underneath. "I'm out of the life," he told her, his voice rough from years of silence. "I've got nothing left but time and a lot of enemies." Florence smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Good. Then we're starting even." The Kaler family never contacted her again. They faded into obscurity, consumed by their own bitterness and regret. Marcello and Florence built something neither had expected, a partnership based not on superstition or obligation, but on choice. She painted. He invested in legitimate businesses. They traveled, argued, loved fiercely and without apology. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, Marcello left a single red rose on the bench where Florence once slept beneath the overpass. A reminder that fortune isn't about luck, it's about finding someone who sees your worth when the world sees nothing but curses. Florence Kaler had been called cursed, broken, death incarnate. But in the end, she proved that the most powerful thing a person can do is choose their own story, write their own ending, and refuse to let anyone else define who they are. She was never cursed. She was always free. She just had to learn to see it. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.